My parents refused to attend my wedding because they believed the man I loved was beneath our family. My father called him a maintenance worker with no future. My mother said marrying him would embarrass everyone who knew us. They returned the invitation unopened and told relatives I was making a mistake I would eventually beg them to fix. 3 weeks before the ceremony, they learned who my fiancé really was. By then, the guest list had been finalized, the seating chart had been printed, and the 2 empty chairs reserved for my parents had already been removed. I was 35 when this happened. My fiancé, Julian Mercer, was 38. We met in Baltimore during the renovation of an old public library. I worked as a development officer for a nonprofit foundation that funded literacy programs, public spaces, and community education. Julian was introduced to me as the site facilities coordinator. That was true. It was simply not the whole truth. My parents refused to attend my wedding because they believed the man I loved was beneath our family. My father called him a maintenance worker with no future. My mother said marrying him would embarrass everyone who knew us. They returned the invitation unopened and told relatives I was making a mistake I would eventually beg them to fix. 3 weeks before the ceremony, they learned who my fiancé really was. By then, the guest list had been finalized, the seating chart had been printed, and the 2 empty chairs reserved for my parents had already been removed. I was 35 when this happened. My fiancé, Julian Mercer, was 38. We met in Baltimore during the renovation of an old public library. I worked as a development officer for a nonprofit foundation that funded literacy programs, public spaces, and community education. Julian was introduced to me as the site facilities coordinator. That was true. It was simply not the whole truth. He wore work boots, carried a radio, checked leaking pipes, argued with contractors, and seemed to know every locked door in the building. The first time we spoke, I was standing beneath a plastic sheet trying to protect a table of donated books from dust. Julian looked at the sheet, looked at me, and said, "That is not going to survive the afternoon." I tied it. That is why. He retied it in 30 seconds. The plastic held. I disliked him immediately. Then a storm flooded part of the basement, and Julian worked beside volunteers until 2 in the morning moving boxes of children's books away from the water. He did not give orders from the stairs. He carried the heaviest boxes. That changed my opinion. Over the next several months, we became friends. He brought coffee during early site meetings. I helped him write grant language for an apprenticeship program. He knew about architecture, contracts, city permits, nonprofit finance, and old buildings in a way that made his job title seem too small. When I asked why, he said, "I have worked around all of it." That answer satisfied me at first. My parents would not have approved of any man whose career required mud on his shoes. I came from a family that cared deeply about presentation. My father, Edward Whitmore, owned a private wealth management firm in Northern Virginia. He advised doctors, business owners, and retired executives. My mother, Caroline, chaired museum committees, organized fundraising dinners, and treated social reputation like a second home that required constant maintenance. I was their only daughter. My older brother, Stephen, was 40 and worked with my father. He had married a corporate attorney named Natalie in a wedding attended by nearly 400 people. The invitation arrived in a box. The place cards were hand-painted. My father still spoke about it as if it had been a successful business transaction. I had always been the less predictable child. I studied literature instead of finance. I chose nonprofit work over joining the family firm. I lived in Baltimore instead of moving back near my parents. They tolerated those choices because they assumed marriage would eventually return me to a life they understood. My mother had a list: educated, established, good family, proper manners, financially secure. She never wrote wealthy, but wealth sat behind every category. When I first told them about Julian, I described him honestly. He works on building operations and restoration projects. My father asked, "For whom?" "Several organizations." "Is he a contractor?" "Sometimes." "Does he own the company?" "I do not think so." My mother said, "You do not think so?" We had been dating 3 months. I did not know his full tax structure. That became evidence against him. The first dinner went badly. Julian wore a navy jacket, clean shirt, and no tie. My father asked about his education before the appetizers arrived. Julian said he studied engineering but left college before finishing because of a family emergency. My mother's expression changed. "What emergency?" "My father became ill." "And you never returned?" "No." "What do you do now exactly?" My father asked. Julian answered, "I oversee facilities, restoration, and capital projects." "For the library?" "For several properties." My father said, "Employee or independent?" "Both, depending on the project." The conversation became an interview: salary, retirement, home ownership, career progression. Julian answered calmly until my father asked whether he had student debt. Then Julian said, "Edward, are you planning to marry me, or is Emma?" The room froze. I almost laughed. My father did not. After dinner, my mother called. "He is defensive." He was interrogated. "Your father was making conversation." "Your father asked about his retirement account." "At your age, these things matter." "They matter to me, not to you." She said Julian lacked polish. My father said he lacked direction. Stephen searched public records and found a modest townhouse in Julian's name, an old pickup truck, and several business registrations connected to project consulting. He sent me screenshots. Subject line, "Please be realistic." I told him to stop investigating. He replied, "We are your family. Someone has to." Julian knew they disliked him. He did not pretend otherwise. But he also did not ask me to choose between them. He said, "Give them time." I asked, "Why are you so calm?" "Because their opinion does not change my work, my past, or how I treat you." That confidence attracted me. It also annoyed my father. The truth about Julian's life emerged gradually. He had grown up outside Baltimore. His father, Marcus, owned a small mechanical contracting business. When Marcus developed kidney failure, Julian left college to help with the company and care for his younger sister, Nora. After his father died, the company faced debt and legal disputes. Julian spent years rebuilding it, then sold the service division to employees. He kept a small project management firm and began investing in neglected historic properties with partners. He never described himself as an owner. He said, "Ownership is a legal condition, not a personality." I liked that. Still, he withheld more than I realized. A year into our relationship, he took me to a renovated warehouse near the harbor. The building contained workshops, offices, classrooms, and a small business incubator. He said his company managed the property. Then a tenant thanked him for saving the whole block. I asked what she meant. Julian admitted he owned a controlling interest in the building through an investment group. I was surprised. "How much else do you own?" He looked uncomfortable. "Some properties." "How many?" "7 major ones. Interests in others." I stared at him. "You let me think you were a facilities coordinator." "I am a facilities coordinator." "You also own the facility." "Yes." "That is not a small omission." He apologized. He explained that his previous relationship ended after his fiancée became intensely focused on his assets, partners, and future inheritance. She pushed him to sell properties and live more visibly. After that, he stopped introducing himself through ownership. I understood the fear. I did not excuse the secrecy. "You tested me," I said. "Yes." "That is not trust." "No." He answered without defending himself. That honesty helped. He showed me business records, debts, partnership agreements, and the full scope of his work. Julian was not a billionaire. He was financially successful, but much of his wealth was tied to complicated real estate projects, historic tax credits, loans, and long-term leases. He lived modestly because he preferred reinvesting in buildings and programs. He also supported Nora and funded apprenticeships quietly. I respected the work more than the money. We agreed my family would learn the truth eventually, but not through a dramatic reveal. That plan failed. Julian proposed at the restored library 2 years after we met. The reading room was closed for the evening. He placed the ring inside a book hollowed by a damaged section that could not be saved. I said, "You destroyed a book? It was moldy." "That does not answer the moral question." He laughed. Then I said yes. We chose a spring wedding at a botanical garden near Baltimore. 120 guests. Simple ceremony. Dinner under a glass pavilion. I called my parents. My mother became quiet. My father asked whether Julian had improved his situation. That phrase ended any hope of celebration. "He was not broken," I said. My father replied, "You know what I mean." "Yes, I do." They asked to meet with us. We agreed. At their house, my father presented concerns like a financial review. Julian's incomplete degree, irregular business income, lack of a conventional employer, the possibility I would become responsible for him. Julian listened. Then he said, "Emma will never be responsible for my financial obligations." My father asked for proof. I stared at him. "You want bank statements before deciding whether to attend our wedding?" "I want assurance." Julian said, "You are not entitled to my financial records." My father stood. "Then I will not support this marriage." My mother began crying. She said I was throwing away my future. Stephen said Julian had manipulated me into rejecting family standards. I said, "Your standards are not the same as character." My father replied, "Character does not pay medical bills." The meeting ended. 2 days later, my parents sent a letter. Not an email, a formal letter. They wrote that they loved me, but could not participate in a marriage they believed was irresponsible. They would not attend the wedding. They asked me to postpone for 1 year and required Julian to demonstrate stable income, disclose liabilities, and complete appropriate premarital counseling. We were already in counseling. We had a prenuptial agreement. We had discussed finances more carefully than anyone in my family knew. I called my mother. "Are you really refusing to attend?" She said, "We are trying to save you from a mistake." "What if I marry him anyway?" "Then you are choosing him over us." That sentence devastated me. Julian found me sitting on the kitchen floor. He said, "We can postpone." "No. You do not have to prove anything." "I am not proving anything. I am refusing their authority." Still, grief entered the wedding planning. Every dress fitting reminded me my mother would not be there. My father had always imagined walking me down the aisle, though I had not asked him yet. Stephen stopped speaking to me. Relatives began calling. Some supported me privately, but refused to challenge my parents publicly. My aunt said, "Your father is stubborn, but he means well." Good intentions became a shield everyone placed around him. Julian remained steady. Too steady. One evening, I said, "You are not angry enough." He looked surprised. "What would anger change?" "It would make me feel less alone." He apologized, then admitted he had emotionally prepared for rejection long before the meeting. "My life taught me not to expect approval from people who need control," he said. I had not learned that yet. 3 months before the wedding, the nonprofit foundation where I worked announced a major urban education initiative. The project would convert an abandoned railway complex into a library, job training center, childcare facility, and affordable workspace for community organizations. The initiative had been developing privately for nearly 2 years. I knew a property consortium had donated the main building and committed substantial renovation funding. I did not know the lead donor's identity. Confidentiality agreements were strict until the city approvals were complete. At the public announcement, I stood with staff, city officials, and journalists. The foundation president thanked Mercer Civic Holdings for contributing the property and $28 million in financing, grants, and guarantees. Then Julian walked onto the stage. For a moment, I thought he was there as a project consultant. The foundation president introduced him as founder and managing partner of Mercer Civic Holdings, my fiancé, the man my father called a maintenance worker with no future. Julian spoke briefly. He did not mention personal wealth. He spoke about abandoned buildings, apprenticeships, neighborhood ownership, and public access. He thanked his partners, employees, city staff, and the foundation. My name was not mentioned because I had not worked on the donor side. That restraint mattered. Afterward, reporters gathered around him. My colleagues stared at me. One said, "You never told us." I did not know the scale. That was true. I knew Julian had property interests. I did not know Mercer Civic Holdings controlled projects across 4 states, or that the Railway Initiative was his largest philanthropic commitment. I felt proud, also unsettled. He had hidden another significant part of his life. In the car, I asked, "28 million?" Not cash from me personally. It includes financing, land value, tax credit commitments, and partner funds. You knew what everyone thought. Yes. You knew my parents called you unstable. Yes. And you said nothing. They did not deserve access to confidential business information because they insulted me? That is not the only issue. He looked at me. You feel tested again? Yes. He pulled over. I should have explained the scale earlier. Why didn't you? Because once people hear numbers, they stop listening to the work. I am not people. No. He apologized. The midpoint revelation was not that Julian had money. It was that secrecy remained a weakness in our relationship. He protected himself by deciding when others were ready for truth, even when the decision involved me. I told him, I will not marry a man who manages information to control how I respond. He looked shaken. I am not trying to control you. Intent does not erase effect. We returned to counseling. For the first time, postponement became possible. Not because of my parents, because trust required repair. Julian disclosed everything relevant: business interests, liabilities, guarantees, lawsuits, family obligations. The railway project carried risk. If public funding failed, his group could face major losses. His life was stable, but not simple. He had not hidden poverty. He had hidden complexity and power. Both mattered. My parents learned about the public announcement through the news. My father called within an hour. His tone had changed completely. Why didn't you tell us who Julian was? I almost laughed. I told you who he was. You said he worked in facilities. He does. That was misleading. No more misleading than assuming a job title measured his worth. My mother said they wanted to meet again. I asked why. To clear up misunderstandings. You refused to attend when you thought he had less money. That was not about money, my father said. What changed today? Silence. That was the answer. They drove to Baltimore that weekend. My mother brought flowers. My father wore the expression he used when preparing to negotiate. Julian greeted them politely. We sat at the same kitchen table where he had once found me crying. My father said, I owe you an apology. Julian waited. We misjudged your situation. Julian replied, You misjudged my character because of what you believed my situation was. My father shifted. That is fair. My mother said they had been concerned about my security. I answered, You were concerned about status. She began crying. I wanted you protected. You wanted me attached to a man you could explain to your friends. That was harsh. Also true. My father asked whether the wedding invitation still stood. I said, "You returned it." He looked hurt. "We acted with incomplete information." "You had enough information to know he was kind, hardworking, and committed, but not enough to know the financial reality." That is exactly the problem. The conversation ended without resolution. My parents expected the discovery to erase the rejection. It did not. The stronger final confrontation came 6 weeks before the wedding. My father contacted Julian privately. He invited him to join the advisory board of Whitmore Wealth Management. He also proposed introducing Julian to several investors and offered to structure family estate planning around our marriage. Julian declined. Then my father asked whether he could announce a new partnership between his firm and Mercer Civic Holdings at our rehearsal dinner. Julian called me immediately. My father had moved from rejecting him to using him. I confronted my parents at their home. "You wanted him hidden when you thought he was poor. Now you want his company in your speech." My father said, "Business relationships are normal between families." "We are not doing business. We could." "No." He became angry. "You are humiliating us. You refused to attend my wedding." We changed our minds. After a press release, my mother said, "Must we be punished forever for one mistake?" It was not one mistake. It was months of pressure, investigation, insults, and a letter telling me to postpone my life until you approved. She said family should forgive. I answered, "Forgiveness does not guarantee the role you expected." That was the boundary. I invited them to the ceremony as guests. My father would not walk me down the aisle. Neither parent would give a speech. No business announcements. No special introduction of Julian's company. They could attend only if they came to support the marriage they had rejected before knowing his status. My father refused. He said attending under those conditions would make him look weak. My mother said she would not come without him. For several days, I believed the empty chairs would remain. Then my mother called alone. She said, "I want to attend." "What about Dad?" "He has to decide for himself." That was the first time she separated her choice from his authority. She attended one counseling session with me. She admitted she had spent years using social judgment to manage anxiety. If life looked respectable, she felt safe. Julian's original presentation, boots, irregular titles, unfinished degree felt dangerous because she could not categorize him. The public announcement gave her a category she respected. "That is ugly," she said. "Yes. I am sorry." Her apology was imperfect, but real. My father resisted until 4 days before the wedding. He called Julian, not me. He apologized without mentioning money. Then he asked whether he could attend quietly. Julian said the decision belonged to me. That detail mattered. My father called me. "I would like to be there." "Why?" "Because you are my daughter." "You knew that before." "I know." He paused. "I was wrong to make attendance conditional on obedience." That was the sentence I needed. Not perfect understanding. Responsibility. I said he could come. He asked whether the aisle decision remained. Yes. He accepted it. On the wedding day, my brother Stephen did not attend. He said the family conflict had become too public and he did not want involvement. That hurt. My parents arrived together but sat among the guests. My mother wore blue. My father looked smaller without the ceremonial role he expected. I walked down the aisle alone, not as a statement that I needed no one, as recognition that the choice was mine. Halfway down, I saw my father stand. For 1 second, I thought he planned to join me. He did not. He simply placed his hand over his heart. I kept walking. Julian waited beneath an arch of spring branches. He looked nervous. That comforted me. Power, money, and hidden influence had not removed the vulnerability of the moment. We exchanged vows that included a promise written after counseling. No important truth will be withheld in the name of protection. When Julian spoke it, his voice shook. My parents heard. So did I. At the reception, my father gave no speech. He spoke privately to Julian's sister, Nora, and to several apprentices from Mercer projects. He learned more about Julian from workers and family than he ever had through financial questions. My mother danced with me. She said, I wish I had been part of the planning. I do too. That grief was honest. Actions have consequences even after forgiveness. The wedding remained joyful, not because conflict disappeared, because no one was allowed to control the meaning of the day. Our marriage began with work already waiting. Julian still had a habit of revealing difficult information only after he had organized it into a manageable form. I still expected rejection and sometimes withheld feelings until they became accusations. We returned to counseling twice during the first 3 years. That is not a sign the marriage failed. It is one reason it did not. The Railway Education Center opened 2 years after our wedding. The project nearly collapsed during construction. Costs rose. A financing partner withdrew. My father offered introductions. This time, Julian accepted one meeting but kept clear boundaries. No family branding, no public claim, no special access. My father respected the terms. That was progress. The center eventually opened with a public library, trade classrooms, childcare rooms, and affordable offices.
Allison immediately took over scheduling instincts, then stopped herself. She asked, "Do you want help?" I said yes. That question showed change. Brian reviewed insurance options only after Samuel invited him. Leah stayed with us during surgery. Our blended family formed not through a ceremony, but through crisis handled with consent. Samuel recovered. During treatment, I sometimes wondered whether my children had been right about one thing. Marriage at our age carried risk, illness, loss, financial complexity. But avoiding love would not eliminate risk. It would only eliminate partnership. My children had imagined they could protect me from grief by preventing attachment. They had already watched me survive grief. What they needed to learn was that survival did not require permanent isolation. The Farm Conservation Fund succeeded. Peter died 2 years after our wedding. The protected land now supports a training program for young farmers and woodworking apprentices. A small plaque honors Richard's early support. It also names Samuel's family. Our histories meet there without competing. The $45,000 became something living. Richard's insurance account remains mine. I used part of it to fund education accounts for the grandchildren. Not because Brian exposed it, because I chose to. The rest supports my retirement and long-term care planning. My children understand now that inheritance begins after a person has finished needing their own resources. That sentence should not be controversial. In many families, it is. Allison and I attended therapy together for several months. She learned to ask before helping. I learned not to reject help simply to prove independence. Brian apologized to Samuel directly. Samuel said, "You were protecting someone you love." Brian replied, "I was also protecting what I thought I might receive." Samuel nodded. Knowing both is useful. They now repair things together. Badly. I hire professionals afterward. At 63, I became a grandmother again. Allison named her daughter Grace. She asked me to stay for 1 week after the birth. Not indefinitely, not as an obligation. I went gladly. Samuel came for 2 days and returned home because he understood the visit was about mother and daughter. Boundaries did not reduce love. They made it easier to choose. People who hear my story sometimes frame it as children trying to save their widowed mother from a gold digger.
One wing was named after Julian's father, Marcus. Another honored neighborhood residents displaced by earlier rail development. No wing carried the Whitmore name. My father attended the opening anyway. He shook Julian's hand and said, "You built something important." Julian replied, A lot of people did. That difference in how they understood success remained. They learned to respect each other without becoming alike. My relationship with Stephen took longer. He believed I had used Julian's identity to embarrass the family. I asked how. You let us look stupid. You investigated him and reported conclusions. You knew we were wrong. I told you. He said I should have provided proof. I answered, respect should not require financial verification. We did not speak for nearly a year. Then his marriage entered trouble. Natalie felt Stephen made every decision through our father. She nearly left. Stephen called me. I think I understand some of it now, he said. Some of what? What it feels like when family approval becomes the condition for peace. That did not erase his behavior. It began repair. Julian and I have been married 6 years now. My parents visit occasionally. They no longer ask about his net worth. My father sometimes asks about projects, but he asks because he is interested, not because he is calculating opportunity. Usually. My mother supports the Library Foundation and takes instructions from staff members whose shoes would once have influenced her opinion. Change can be slow and visible in small places. I eventually left my nonprofit role and became an independent advisor for community development programs. I did not join Julian's company. That choice mattered. His identity had already overshadowed too much of our early story. I wanted work that remained mine. People who hear what happened enjoy the reversal. Parents reject the maintenance worker, then discover he controls major properties and funds a public project. It sounds like a satisfying lesson about hidden wealth. But the money did not make my parents' judgment wrong. Their judgment was wrong before they knew. If Julian had truly been a facilities coordinator earning a modest salary, he would still have deserved respect. If he had never owned a building, my choice would still have belonged to me. The reveal exposed them.
Samuel was not one, but even if their concerns had been more justified, they still needed to speak with respect, evidence, and limits. Adult children do not become owners of a parent's future because they fear losing the past. Parents also owe honesty. I should have removed Allison's account access earlier. I should have explained the farm transaction before it appeared as a suspicious transfer. Privacy is not secrecy, but I used silence partly because I expected criticism. That made discovery more dramatic. Still, the decision remained mine. That is the line our family finally learned. Concern can ask. Concern can advise. Concern can investigate obvious fraud with care. Concern cannot cancel contracts, seize authority, or treat disagreement as incompetence. Samuel and I have been married 5 years now. We are not a romantic miracle. We argue about noise, thermostat settings, and his habit of saving bent screws. We travel, we volunteer, we care for one another.
It did not create his value. That became the most important part of the story. Julian also learned that modesty can become deception when it removes another person's ability to understand the life they are joining. He did not owe my parents balance sheets. He owed me full truth. We both had to separate privacy from secrecy. My parents had to separate caution from control. The wedding did not solve those lessons, it made them unavoidable. I keep the formal letter my parents sent, the one asking me to postpone. For years, I considered destroying it. Now it sits in a file with our counseling notes, prenup, wedding invitation, and a photograph of me walking alone down the aisle. The documents tell a fuller story than the wedding album. Love, fear, pride, boundaries, revision. My father once asked whether I regretted not letting him walk me down the aisle after he apologized. I said no. Then I told him the truth.
Some evenings we sit on the porch without speaking. The silence feels different from widowhood. It is shared. Richard remains part of my life. His photographs are still in the house. Samuel's are beside them. Love did not replace love. Life expanded. That was the truth my children could not understand until they saw it. At 58, I did not fall in love because I forgot my husband. I fell in love because I remembered what it felt like to be known and chose not to spend the rest of my life treating companionship as betrayal. My children tried to stop the wedding because fear convinced them control was devotion. I married anyway, not to defy them, not to prove age had not changed me. I married because my judgment still belonged to me. Years later, when Allison worries I am taking on too much, or Brian questions a financial choice, they begin differently. Can we ask? Most of the time, I say yes. Sometimes I say no, and the relationship survives.
I regret that your choices made the decision necessary. He nodded. So do I. That was enough. My parents refused to attend because they believed Julian's visible life did not match the future they had designed for me. They returned when status made him understandable. I allowed them back only after they admitted that attendance was not a reward they could grant for obedience. Julian was never secretly valuable because he owned properties. He was valuable when he carried wet boxes from a flooded basement, when he listened, when he apologized, when he let my decision remain mine. That is who my husband really was. Not the man behind Mercer Civic Holdings, not the donor in the newspaper. The man my parents could have seen from the beginning if they had known how to look beyond a title. A year after the wedding, my parents invited Julian and me to dinner without mentioning business. That sounds small. It was not.
That may be the greatest proof that our family healed. Not that they approved of every choice, that they finally learned love can remain after authority ends. A year after Samuel's recovery, our family returned to the vineyard for dinner. There was no ceremony, only a long table beneath string lights. Allison brought old photographs of Richard. Leah brought pictures of Samuel as a young father. Brian brought nothing and claimed that was his contribution to keeping the evening simple. At one point, my granddaughter asked why I had 2 wedding rings in the jewelry box she had seen while helping me dress. I told her one belonged to the life I had with Richard and one belonged to the life I had with Samuel. She asked which one I loved more. The adults became quiet. I said, "They belong to different promises." That answer seemed enough for her. It became enough for me, too.
My father cooked badly. My mother served a dessert she had purchased and pretended she made. No investors appeared. No questions about projects, income, or future plans entered the room. Halfway through dinner, my father asked Julian about the apprenticeship program at the library complex. Julian described a young electrician who had completed training after years of unstable work. My father listened without calculating tax advantages. Then he said, "I spent most of my life believing security was the best evidence of a good decision." Julian answered, "Security matters." My father nodded. "But it is not the same as worth." That sentence showed me he had finally understood part of the harm. My mother's change appeared differently. She volunteered at a literacy fundraiser and was assigned to registration under a 24-year-old coordinator named Keisha. Years earlier, my mother would have taken over. This time, she followed instructions. Afterward, she called me. "I was tempted to correct everything." "Did you?" "Only the crooked name tags." I laughed. She added, "Keisha was excellent." Learning to respect competence before status had become deliberate work for her. Stephen eventually apologized to Julian as well. He said, "I researched you as if my sister's choice required family approval." Julian replied, "You were trying to protect her." Stephen said, "And control her." That honesty allowed them to move forward. They never became close friends. Not every repaired relationship must become intimate. At our 5th anniversary dinner, my father raised a glass.
For years, I had feared that choosing happiness again required ranking the men, marriages, and families in my life. It did not. Richard gave me history, children, and decades of partnership. Samuel gave me companionship after loss and the courage to stop apologizing for still being alive. My children gave me love complicated by fear. I gave them boundaries complicated by anger. None of us behaved perfectly. We learned anyway. The vineyard owner remembered our wedding and asked whether we wanted to recreate a photograph. We stood near the same row of vines. This time, the children joined us. No one was positioned as a replacement. No one was excluded to protect a memory. When the photograph arrived, I placed it beside the older one from my first marriage. 2 frames, 1 shelf, a whole life rather than competing chapters. That is what I wish I had understood sooner. Starting again does not erase what came before. It reveals whether the people who love you can make room for who you are becoming. My children tried to stop my wedding because they believed family safety meant keeping everything familiar. The wedding taught us the opposite. Sometimes a family survives only after it allows something new to begin.
He did not speak about Julian's company, the railway project, or the family name. He said, "To Emma, who taught us that love is not an application the family approves." I looked at him. The words were simple. They carried years. Later, Julian asked whether hearing the toast made the past feel resolved. "No," I said. "Good?" "Yes." Resolution is not erasure. The refused invitation still happened. The empty planning months still happened. The discovery of Julian's status still changed my parents faster than my pain had. But people are allowed to become better after revealing something ugly. The question is whether their new behavior survives after the embarrassment fades. My parents did, not perfectly, reliably enough. That became our family's real second chance. The wedding was only the day we decided who could enter. The years afterward showed who was willing to enter differently.